The city was alive, but this little cafe stayed quiet, away from the noise. It was one of those places where people came to relax, to think, to escape. A music producer, known for his sharp ear and even sharper attitude, walked in like he owned the place. He wore expensive clothes, sunglasses, indoors, and a watch that cost more than most people's cars. People looked at him, some smiled, others whispered. But he didn't care. He was here for his usual strong coffee. No sugar and 10 minutes of peace. In the corner near the window sat a girl. She looked about 20, maybe younger, with messy brown hair tied loosely behind her head. Her clothes were worn out, clearly secondhand. Her shoes had holes, and her guitar case was scratched and taped together. To most, she looked invisible, like someone who didn't matter, but not to the cafe owner. He had seen her come in for weeks, always ordering the cheapest tea, always sitting in the same spot, and always carrying that old guitar. She never asked to perform. She never begged anyone to listen. She just sat quietly, as if waiting for something or someone. The producer glanced at her and scoffed. Another lost dreamer, he thought. Probably can't even play more than 3 chords. He looked away. Not knowing that this very girl would soon become the center of his world, she glanced up and saw him, her eyes hopeful for just a moment. She had seen his photo once in a magazine left behind on a table. She knew who he was, and she had dreamed of this chance for days. As he waited for his coffee, she slowly stood, holding her guitar. She walked up to him, nervous, her heart racing. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly. "Would you mind listening to one song?" "Just one." He didn't even look up from his phone. "I don't do charity auditions," he replied, his voice cold and bored. She stood there, frozen for a second, then nodded politely. "Of course," she whispered. "Sorry to bother you." She walked back to her corner slowly, her face red with embarrassment. Other people in the cafe looked at her, some with pity, some pretending not to notice. But she didn't cry. She held her guitar a little tighter and sat back down. Inside her chest, her heart was heavy, but her hope wasn't gone. The cafe owner came over and handed her a fresh cup of tea. "On the house," he said gently, "don't let that man make you feel small." She gave a weak smile, grateful for his kindness. "He's a big deal," she said quietly, "but maybe someday he'll listen." The cafe owner looked at her with warm eyes. "You have something?" he said. "I know it." Outside, the weather began to shift. Dark clouds covered the sky, and soft rain started to fall. Inside the cafe, it grew cozier, warmer, with soft lights and gentle music from the speakers. The girl looked out the window, watching drops slide down the glass. In her head, she heard melodies, soft tunes forming. Music was the only thing that made her feel real. The producer, meanwhile, finished his coffee and left, annoyed. He had work to do. Meetings, deadlines, artists to manage. He didn't even remember the girl he brushed off to him. She was just another voice in a crowd of noise, but fate had other plans. In the corner of that small cafe, on that rainy day, a spark had been lit. A quiet girl with a broken guitar and a heart full of music waited. She didn't know if the world would ever hear her song, but she believed in something more powerful than fame. She believed in the power of music to touch a soul, and in just a few days, her melody would do exactly that. And the man who thought she was a nobody, he was about to realize how wrong he had been. Because sometimes, the quietest voice in the room is the one that changes everything. The next morning, the sky was clear, but her heart still felt cloudy. She returned to the same little cafe with the same quiet hope, wearing the same patched sweater and holding her same old guitar. She ordered her tea, the cheapest one again, and sat in the corner. The guitar rested beside her like a trusted friend, silent but always there. She didn't expect much. Something inside her said, "Try again." She believed that even one song could open a door, and maybe, just maybe, the music producer might return today. She didn't want fame. She didn't even want money. She just wanted someone to hear her song, to truly feel it. Hours passed, and just as she was about to leave, the door opened. The bell above the entrance gave its soft ring, and in walked the same man. The music producer wore the same expensive coat, the same confident face. He glanced around. nodded to the cafe owner, and walked straight to the counter. This time the girl didn't hesitate. She stood up quickly, heart pounding harder than before. She picked up her guitar and walked toward him. "Taking soft steps like walking on glass, sir?" she said, voice soft but steady. "I'm sorry to bother you again. Before she could finish her sentence, he raised a hand to stop her. He didn't even turn around, just stared at his phone screen. "I already told you," he said flatly. "I don't do charity auditions." The words felt like a slap. Her cheeks burned, but she forced a small smile. "I understand," she whispered, taking a step back. She wasn't angry, not truly. She just felt invisible around them. A few customers glanced up from their drinks. One older man shook his head quietly. A young woman bit her lip. The room didn't make a sound, but the silence screamed louder than words. Still, the girl nodded and turned away, walking slowly back to her chair. Her guitar looked heavier now, like it carried more than just strings and wood. The producer picked up his coffee without a care. To him, it was just another awkward moment to forget. He didn't see her eyes, how they flickered with sadness and belief at the same time. He didn't know that she had spent years practicing that one song. He didn't care that her hands were rough from playing with no teacher. No help, just passion. As she sat down, her fingers ran along the strings of the guitar. She wasn't going to cry, not here, not in front of strangers. But she did feel something heavy settle in her chest. Not rejection, not defeat, but the ache of being unseen. The cafe owner walked over with a fresh tea again. She looked up in surprise. "I didn't order this," she said softly. He smiled, placing the cup in front of her. "It's from me," he said. "Don't give up. I've been hearing you tune that guitar for weeks. I know you're holding something special." She looked at him with tired eyes, then gave a gentle nod. "I just wanted him to hear," she said, voice barely above a whisper. The owner sat beside her for a moment. "He doesn't see people anymore," he replied. "Only products. Numbers and trends." She nodded again, fingers lightly strumming the guitar. The notes barely audible, but the melody was soft and beautiful, even in sadness. Her music had warmth. "You're not a product," the owner said, standing up again. "You're a story, and one day, someone will listen," she whispered. "I hope so." As she looked out the window, outside the city moved like always, cars rushing. 8 people passing, dreams rising and falling. Inside, in that quiet corner, she sat alone, but still hopeful, still holding her guitar like it mattered. She didn't know that the man she had just approached would be back sooner than she thought. She didn't know that a moment was coming that would flip their lives upside down. All she knew was this: she wouldn't stop playing. Not for rejection, not for silence. Her voice may have been ignored today, but it wasn't the end. It was just the pause before the music truly began. And upstairs, unknown to her, the producer had left his tablet behind. He'd return for it soon, and when he did, her song would finally be heard, not by accident, but by fate. Rain poured down that afternoon like the sky was crying. The streets were quiet, umbrellas danced in puddles, and cold wind rushed through alleyways inside the cafe. The mood was calm but sleepy. Only a few people sat at tables sipping warm drinks. The smell of coffee and wet earth filled the air, and soft jazz played from a dusty speaker. In the corner, the girl sat once more, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. Her guitar leaned against the wall beside her, strings slightly damp from the walk through the rain. She hadn't played in front of people since that rejection, but the music inside her had been growing louder. It itched in her fingers, beat in her chest, whispered in her dreams, and today, for some reason, felt like the right day to let it out. She looked around. Saw only a few strangers, no big producer, no cameras, no pressure, just a sleepy day and a silent room. The perfect place for a voice to rise. She took a breath, picked up her guitar, and sat straight on the old stool in the corner. Her heart thumped as she placed her fingers on the strings. Then she played. The first note came out soft. Like a sigh, the second note followed. Deeper, warmer. She closed her eyes, let the rhythm guide her hands. The cafe began to change. People looked up slowly from their screens, their books, their thoughts. Her voice joined the guitar, smooth and pure. carrying a sadness too old for her age. She didn't shout. She didn't perform. She just told a story with sound, one of pain, hope, and dreams left behind. And without realizing it, she caught every ear in the room. Even the cafe owner paused. Wiping his hands on a cloth as he stood behind the counter, he smiled softly. Like a father watching his child take their first real step, the girl played as if no one was there. But her song touched every heart like it was written just for them. It was more than talent, it was truth and melody, and the room listened like it had never listened before. Then the door opened. The bell above the entrance gave a familiar ring. The music producer walked in quickly, brushing water off his coat. He had returned to find the tablet he had left behind earlier. He didn't even notice the guitar at first, or the voice echoing in the corner. But then he froze halfway to the counter. His body stiffened. He heard something that reached through. The noise in his mind? A note, a voice, a sound that felt like home and heartbreak all at once. He turned slowly, eyes searching for the source. And there she was, the same girl he had brushed off twice. She didn't see him. Her eyes were closed. Her fingers danced over the strings with care, her voice rising and falling like waves. And for the first time in years, he forgot about deadlines, contracts, and deals. He just listened. The melody wasn't perfect, but it was real. And it reminded him of something long buried. A time when music wasn't about fame or money, it was about feeling. It was about healing. He stood near the door, soaked from the rain, but inside, something warm began to grow. Her voice carried a truth he had forgotten, and though she was just a girl in a cafe, her song had more power than any stage he'd ever booked. When she reached the last verse, her voice shook slightly. It was raw, emotional, almost like a goodbye. As the final note faded, the room stayed quiet. No one moved, no one clapped. Not yet. Then slowly, one by one, hands came together. Soft applause at first, then louder, fuller. The girl looked up in surprise, her eyes wide and unsure. She saw strangers smiling, some with tears, and then she saw him. The music producer stood at the back, clapping, but not with pride or ego. His face had changed. There was something broken in his eyes, but also something healing. He clapped not for her fame, but for her truth. And in that moment she understood her music had reached him. Not through fame, not through force, but through the quiet power of honesty. She had played in the rain, not to impress, but to express. And someone had finally listened. The sound of her song stayed in his ears even after it ended. The cafe had returned to its quiet hum. But inside the music producer's mind, something was still playing. He stood there, frozen, the clapping fading. Around him, his hands stopped moving, but his heart didn't. It was racing not from excitement, but from memory. He had heard that voice before. Not exactly the same, but close. A long time ago, in a house that no longer stood. A young girl had once sung like that, not for money, not for anyone's approval. She sang because it made her happy. And he remembered how her laugh echoed after every note. That girl was his sister. She was younger, full of light, always asking him to listen to her sing. Back then, he was just a boy with big dreams. She would sit by the window singing about stars, about dreams, about love she hadn't yet felt. He always promised to make her a star one day, but life didn't wait, and neither did tragedy one winter night. A drunk driver took her life. She was only 16. And the house that once echoed with music fell into silence. After that, he buried the pain in work. He pushed harder, built a career, chased fame, signed artists, and made millions. But he never listened again, not really, not with his heart, until now, as the girl in the cafe packed up her guitar, he took a shaky step forward. He wasn't sure what he would say, or even if he could speak at all. His throat felt tight, his chest heavy, but something inside told him not to walk away again. She looked up as he approached, surprised, unsure. He stood in front of her, dripping from the rain, eyes red but not angry. For a moment, they just looked at each other, no words, just silence. Then, in a voice softer than she expected, he said, "What's your name?" She blinked, unsure if he was serious. Why? She asked carefully, so you can reject me a third time. He gave a short breath that was almost a laugh, almost a sigh. No, he said, because I want to remember the name of the girl who reminded me why I ever loved music. She didn't know what to say, but she felt her heart swell. My name's Leela, she answered, hugging her guitar closer. He nodded. Whispering the name under his breath like a prayer, Leela, he repeated, that voice. You have no idea what it brought back. She tilted her head. What did it bring back? He sat on the chair across from her, no longer a producer, no longer a man in control, just someone broken, trying to heal. My sister, he said, eyes looking. Far away, she used to sing like that, full of life, full of soul, and I lost her. Lila didn't speak. She just listened, and in that moment, her music had done something bigger than any chart topper. It had opened a locked door in a man's heart. She reached out and gently placed her hand on his, not in pity, but in understanding. I'm sorry, she said quietly, but I'm glad my song reached you. He looked at her with misty eyes. It didn't just reach me, he said. It shattered me, and maybe that's what I needed. The cafe owner watched from a distance, his heart full. Had seen many people walk through that door, but none like these two souls, one broken by loss, the other carrying a quiet hope, finally meeting in the space where music lives. Outside, the rain had stopped, and sunlight began to peek through the gray clouds. It was soft, gentle, it's like a blessing inside. The music producer wiped his eyes and smiled for the first time in years. Leela, he said again, sing for me, just one more time. She hesitated, then nodded, and as she strummed her guitar once more, he closed his eyes and let the past and present blend. This wasn't just a song anymore. It was a memory brought back to life, and through that song, he found something he thought he had lost forever, a reason to feel again. It started with a leak. One of the studio assistants had shared a short demo online, just a 30-second clip of Leela's song. There was no name, no label, no big promotion, just a voice, a guitar, and a feeling. But that feeling spread like fire, and one day the video reached thousands. By the end of the week, it was in the millions. People around the world were asking, who is this girl? They searched, they shared, they cried. Music blogs called her voice haunting. Influencers used her song in emotional videos. Radio stations played the clip over and over, but no one knew her name yet. Meanwhile, Lila still walked the same streets. She still visited the small cafe, still ordered the cheapest tea. She taught a little boy how to hold a guitar properly. She helped a street singer fix a broken string.
Ow.
The producer watched all of this from a distance. He didn't rush her, didn't throw her into fame too fast. He let the music lead the way, and soon it did. The label offered her a contract, a real one, with fair terms. She signed it with shaky hands and a glowing heart, and within weeks, her first official song was released. It was the same one she had sung in the corner of the cafe, but now it was heard in every corner of the world. People stopped their cars to listen. Teens played it in their headphones before bed. Others cried while cooking, feeling the song in their bones, and the media finally found her. They called her the girl from the corner who made the world listen. She was on talk shows, podcasts, magazine covers, yet through it all, she stayed humble. She wore simple clothes, spoke with quiet honesty. When asked about her style, she said, I just sing what's in my heart. When asked about fame, she smiled and said, it still feels unreal. And when asked how it all began, she always replied, in a little cafe. With a guitar and a song no one had heard yet, the producer stood backstage during her first live performance. The crowd was massive, lights bright, but he was thinking about that rainy day. The day she played for no one and, yet changed everything. Remembered brushing her off, and he still carried that guilt. But she never held it against him. Instead, she called him her mentor, her first real believer. And when she took the stage, the crowd roared, but her eyes found his in the shadows. She nodded. That was her thank you, not just for the studio or the card, but for coming back that day, for listening when it mattered. She stepped to the mic and began to sing the same song, the same guitar. But now, it was echoing through a stadium, and yet it felt just as raw, just as personal.
Yes.
Because Lila never sang for fame, she sang for connection. For memory, for her younger self, for every girl told she wasn't good enough, for every boy too shy to speak but brave enough to play a chord. She sang for the quiet ones, the forgotten ones, the ones who never stopped dreaming in the world. Listened, not because of ads or marketing, but because of truth after the show. Reporters gathered around her. "What changed your life?" One asked. She thought for a moment, then smiled gently. "Someone believed in me." Finally, but deep down, she knew the real truth. It wasn't just about someone believing in her. It was also about her believing in herself. Fine and when, no. One else did. Even when doors closed, voices mocked, and dreams faded, she kept singing. And that's what truly changed everything, from nobody to spotlight, from silence to song. Lila didn't just rise, she lifted others with her voice, and reminded the world that sometimes the quietest voice becomes the loudest echo. Weeks turned into months. And Lila's voice continued to reach hearts around the world. Her songs climbed the charts, but her soul remained grounded. In by mansions or private cars, she still walked to the cafe sometimes, still carried the same guitar case, scratched but proud. People often asked, why hasn't fame changed her? The answer was simple. She never wanted to be famous. She only wanted to be heard, to be understood. And now that she was, she made sure her music helped others too. She visited schools and gave free music lessons to kids. She donated guitars to children who couldn't afford them. She performed in hospitals, shelters, even on street corners. Because for Lila, music was never about spotlight. It was about healing. The producer watched her rise with quiet pride. He never took credit. For her success, in interviews, when people praised him for discovering her, he always said, "No, I didn't discover her. I just stopped long enough to listen." But the truth was, she had changed him. Before Lila, he had turned cold. He judged people by their clothes, their voices, their marketing potential. He'd stopped feeling, stopped listening with his heart. But Lila's voice broke through all of that. She reminded him of why he started in music, not for awards or applause, but because music had once saved him. And now, through her, it had saved him again. He began running his studio differently. He opened a program for unknown artists with no money. He let street performers record for free. He gave chances to voices no one else would listen to. And every time someone thanked him, he thought of Lila. He remembered the girl with messy hair and patched clothes. The girl he had once brushed off without a second look, and how that girl had become the voice of a generation. Lila never acted. Like a star, when people called her the hope of music, she just smiled and said, "I'm still learning." She never forgot the ones who supported her before the world knew her name. She stayed in touch with the cafe owner, even bought him a new coffee machine as a gift. But the old man kept using the broken one, saying, "This machine made the tea that kept your dreams warm." One day, Lila was asked to speak at a global music summit. She stood on stage in a simple dress, holding her old guitar. She didn't give a long speech full of big words. She just told her story, how she sat in a corner and sang for no one, how a man walked in, didn't care, and walked out, and how that same man walked back in and truly heard her. Then she looked into the crowd straight at him and said, "He changed my life. But more than that, I changed his." The crowd stood in applause, but he stayed seated, eyes misty, hands on his heart, because he knew deep inside she was right. She had given him more than music. She had given him purpose again. She had given him a second chance to do what was right, and that kind of gift you never forget. As the years passed, Lila became a legend, not because she sold the most albums, but because she made the most hearts feel something real. She never chased fame, but it followed her because of her truth. And wherever she went, she carried the memory of that rainy day, the cafe, the cold rejection, the second chance, and the man who finally listened when someone asked her, "What's your greatest success?" She didn't mention awards or stages or streams. She simply said, "My greatest success was waking someone's heart up again." Because in the end, Leela didn't just change the world with her voice, she reminded the world and one lost man that every voice matters, and sometimes it takes just one song to rewrite to lives forever. The cafe was quiet again, but a different kind of silence filled the room. It's not empty, not awkward. This silence was full of meaning. The music producer sat across from Leela, the girl whose song had cracked his cold. Guarded heart, he looked at her now, not as a nobody, not as a street performer, but as someone who carried something rare, something honest, something powerful. Lila slowly put down her guitar, unsure what to say next. She had never imagined this moment, never expected a man like him to sit and truly listen. She was still afraid it was a dream, still afraid that it could disappear the moment she blinked. Then he spoke, his voice low but steady. Lila, he said, would you sing that song again? She stared at him, confused. Why? He smiled gently, not the smirk of a proud producer, but the soft smile of someone who had been moved, because this time he said, I want to listen. It's not with my ears, but with my heart. She held her guitar again, her fingers trembling. Was this real? Was this the same man who once brushed her off without a glance? But there was no mocking in his voice, no coldness in his eyes, only respect, only curiosity, only something close to awe. She played again, her voice softer than before. Each note flowed like a gentle river, carrying emotions she didn't have to explain. And this time, he didn't just hear the song, he felt it. He closed his eyes. Leaning back in the chair, letting every word sink deep, the lyrics spoke of loss, of hope, of holding on when everything feels like it's slipping away. When the last note faded, he opened his eyes slowly. His heart was full, and his past felt lighter. He looked at her and said something she didn't expect. You deserve to be heard. By the world, he said, not just this room. She blinked. What do you mean? He reached into his coat and pulled out a silver card, placing it on the table. It had his name, his company, and his number. I want you to come to my studio tomorrow, he said. I want to record that song and anything else you have inside. You, Lila, stared at the card like it was a golden ticket. Her hands shook as she picked it up, reading it twice. You want me to record? She asked in disbelief. He nodded. I've worked with hundreds of singers, some of the best, but none of them ever made me feel what you just did. Still unsure? Still cautious? She asked. Why now? His voice softened even more. Because I almost forgot what real music was, he said. And you reminded me, not with fame, not with flash, just truth. Tears filled her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. She had been turned down so many times before, so many empty promises, so much silence from people who said they would call, but never did. But something about this moment felt different. He wasn't offering her a handout, he was offering her a door. I'll come, she said finally, her voice trembling but full of hope. He smiled, standing up and adjusting his coat. Be there at 10 sharp, he said. Don't be late and bring that guitar. It's part of your soul. Then he turned to leave, pausing at the door. And Lila, he added, thank you for saving a part of me I thought was gone. She sat there long after he left, still staring at the card. The cafe owner walked over, grinning. So, what did I tell you? She laughed through her tears, nodding. You were right, she whispered. Someone listened. Finally, that night, she didn't sleep much. She cleaned her guitar as best as she could, combed her hair carefully, and laid out the same old clothes. She didn't have anything new to wear, but she had something. Better hope tomorrow. Her music would be heard, not on a street corner, not in a quiet cafe, but in a real studio with real lights, with someone who believed in her voice, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she belonged somewhere. Not because of money, not because of fame, but because someone saw her not just the girl with the guitar, but the artist, the soul, the story behind the song. The next morning, the sky was clear and the sun was soft. Lila stood outside the studio gate with her guitar in hand and butterflies in her stomach. She wore the same old jeans, the same sweater, and the same shoes with tiny holes. But today she didn't care about clothes or looks, because inside, Her chest, something new had bloomed hope. She looked up at the glass building with wide eyes. It was taller than she expected, with shiny walls and a big logo at the top. She had never been in a place like this before. She took a deep breath, walked in, and stepped into a new world. Inside, everything smelled like fresh paper and polished floors. Big posters of famous singers lined the walls, people in headsets, and sharp clothes moved quickly. Lila stood still for a second, feeling small but determined. Then she heard a familiar voice. Lila, the music producer, called, walking toward her with a rare smile. "You made it," he said. "Right. On time?" She nodded. Hugging her guitar tight, "I said I would." He led her down a hallway, through glass doors, into a bright room with sound panels on the walls. In the center stood a microphone, surrounded by warm lights. A sound engineer sat behind a glass window, adjusting dials and levels. "This is your space," the producer said. "We'll just do one take. No pressure." Lila stepped in slowly, her feet almost floating. She placed her guitar strap over her shoulder and faced the mic. The room was quiet, but her heart beat like a drum. She closed her eyes, took a breath, and began to play. The first chord echoed through the room like a whisper in a cave. Her voice followed, steady and soft. It carried no polish, no training, no fancy tricks, just truth. And that truth wrapped itself around the room, wrapping the listeners in silence. The sound engineer, who had heard thousands of voices, sat back in his chair, stunned. He didn't touch the buttons, didn't adjust the levels. He just listened, wide-eyed. As her voice told its story, every note, every pause, every emotion was real behind the glass. The producer stood still, arms crossed but heart wide open. He had signed chart toppers, trained stars, managed talent across the globe, but in this small girl with this old guitar, he found something no studio could teach soul. When Lila finished, the last note hung in the air for a moment longer. Then silence returned, but not the kind that felt empty. This silence was full, like everyone was holding their breath. Then came a single word from the sound engineer. "Wow," he whispered. That was magic." Lila opened her eyes slowly, unsure of what just happened. She stepped out of the booth, gripping her guitar tight. "Was that okay?" she asked softly. The producer walked over, placed a hand on her shoulder, and smiled. "Better than okay," he said. "That was pure gold." He turned to the sound engineer and said, "Call the label now. They need to hear this." The man nodded. Already dialing, Lila stood there, trying to believe it. This moment felt unreal, but everything around her said it wasn't a dream. You didn't need 5 takes, vocal coaching, or a fancy team, the producer said. You walked in with a story and you sang it. That's what the world needs. Lila smiled, her eyes shiny with happy tears. "I never thought I'd be here," she whispered. "And yet here you are," he replied, "because you didn't give up." They sat in the lounge as the label team was called. She played a few more songs, each one better than the last. The producer listened carefully, already imagining albums, shows, videos, but deep inside, it wasn't about the business, not this time. This time it was about something bigger. It was about honoring real talent, real emotion. It was about giving a voice to someone who had been ignored for too long. And most of all, it was about remembering why music mattered in the first place. That day in that simple room, a star was quietly born. Not from glitter, not from fame, but from honesty and the courage to sing. Lila didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but today, she knew one thing for sure. Someone finally heard her and believed.